And so we must protect our sovereignty and our cherished independence above all. When we do, we will find new avenues for cooperation unfolding before us. Let us choose peace and freedom over domination and defeat. And let us come here to this place to stand for our people and their nations, forever strong, forever sovereign, forever just. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless the nations of the world.
Can you just break down what the central bank is looking to do here?
Sure. I mean, they're in a situation where they're approaching desperation. They just doubled down and created the biggest bubble in world history. Now, some people think that they're planning a crash and that they've had all this in their mind from the beginning. And they always have options. But I don't think they thought things would get out of control the way they have been because of the resistance of the populations to their attempts to increase their power. You know, we've seen it with the Brexit vote, with the Trump election, with the Italy, Hungary, Brazil, India. Everywhere you look around the world, there's a resurgence of nationalism. And so what do? They've come together at the same time the G7 was going on, which was a complete catastrophe. The only one who was standing on his own 2 feet at the G7 meeting was Trump. But while this was going on, in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, at the annual Kansas City Federal Reserve retreat, you had a strategy put forward for their new global empire. In fact, the term they used was it's time for a regime change in international finance. The head of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, who called for adopting what he called a synthetic hegemonic currency. Just the language itself shows you how crazy it is.
He is calling for the creation of a new virtual currency that could ease the reliance of the world on the U.S. dollar, which he says creates some of the problems that we have today.
The genius, if you will, of cryptocurrencies is that, as we all know, they're distributed. They cut out the central banks, they cut out the banks, and they're ideally directly peer-to-peer between you and I. And so the challenge for payment systems is to move in that direction, so we can instantaneously move money from my account to your account to the publican's account, the guy who runs the pub, directly. And what we're doing at the Bank of England is we're reorganizing the core of the system in a way that allows new payment providers to just plug in.
A lot of people don't really understand what a global reserve currency is or why it's important. One aspect of it is that it makes sense to choose a standard currency for the settlement of international trade. And the US dollar has served in that role since the end of World War II. But the arguably more important definition of the phrase reserve currency is that it's the currency in which central banks hold their foreign exchange reserves, is that the nation issuing the global reserve currency enjoys an immense artificial demand for its currency because everyone else in the world needs both the reserve currency itself in order to settle international trade, and they also need sovereign bonds denominated in that currency to serve as central bank reserve assets.
Why are we having so many problems related to the U.S. being strong but the rest of the world being weak? And he says that's because so much of the world is priced in dollars. So the theory of flexible exchange rates resolving these imbalances is not working.
Way back in the 1950s, economist Robert Triffin explained why global reserve currencies never last forever. See the Wikipedia entry for Triffin Dilemma if you want the gory details. The gist of it is that the country issuing the reserve currency will have the opportunity to borrow and spend recklessly without suffering the immediate consequences that other non-reserve issuer nations would suffer if they tried to do the same thing.
What he might be getting at here is this idea that the U.S. is affecting the world beyond the amount which the world should be affected. And that's why, you know, Sarah, I know former traders in Russia that sit there and watch the U.S. employment report for how Russian stocks are going to trade. And the question I think Carney's asking is that right? Or should there be a different weighting of the importance of the U.S. economy on the rest of the world?
The process takes decades to play out, but eventually the reserve currency issuing nation becomes so indebted that other countries no longer trust the creditworthiness of the reserve currency. At that point, the rest of the world abandons the incumbent global reserve currency and chooses a new one. And to be sure, pressure has been building in international circles to reduce dependency on the US dollar as the kingpin of the international monetary system.
That really set the tone for an acceleration of getting out from under the dominance of the US dollar and the Western financial systems such as SWIFT and what have you, and looking for alternative approaches. And what we're seeing here is this acceleration. We're seeing Russia, China, Iran, Turkey, India, Pakistan, the BRICS countries of Brazil, China, Russia, and even South Africa beginning now to look more eastward in this pursuit.
Yes, yes. And I mean, true to, you know, the very beginnings of the company, we've always really understood that for these innovations with blockchain and digital assets to really take hold around the world, it needs to operate within a global regulatory framework. So just to start us off, and I mean, that's kind of a really big thing to take on. So just to start us off, kind of tell us about the landscape. What is the regulatory climate around the world?
You know, we're actively engaged in with 50 governments around the world, and I think that the regulators are hearing us, and I think that they've been extraordinarily receptive. I think, you know, from a U.S. standpoint, the U.S. I think is trying to provide some more clarity, which I think is a very positive development, because at the end of the day, there's a significant risk there that we'll lose business to overseas. And what does that mean? It means we lose innovation, we lose tax revenues, and we lose jobs, and that's not a good outcome. So there is a significant risk there if we don't get it right.
The way at Ripple we view cross-border payments as sort of the most practical use case for digital assets. More recently, we've seen global consensus from countries across the world, including the UK, Australia, Malaysia, Singapore, noting that XRP is not a security, but in fact a hybrid between a utility and settlement token. And again, I just reiterate that we do not see crypto as replacing fiat. We see opportunities for the two to coexist, and we see significant benefits from building network of networks.
People are going to speculate on different asset classes. People speculate on gold, currencies, you name it, people are going to speculate. When we think about this, and what I've said very publicly is I think the long-term value of any digital asset is going to be derived from the utility it delivers.
Billions and billions and billions and billions and billions and billions and billions.
So around payments, we think XRP is uniquely and extremely well positioned to solve that payments problem. It's extremely fast at about 3 seconds per transaction, and it costs about 1/1000th of a penny to actually enable that transaction. So we often make the point that, well, where Bitcoin is very profound in solving that store of value, an XRP transaction's about 1,000 times faster and it's about 1,000 times cheaper per transaction.
There tends to be one reserve currency, and it tends to be a stable equilibrium for a period of time, but it's not infinite, right? The pound, of course, was the reserve currency for many, many years, but now the dollar has been for some time.
So what do you consider risks to that changing at some point in the future?
It's a very long-run thing. It's a fairly stable equilibrium. You have to think of what currency out there would compete with the dollar, and they're really, the euro, or it's hard to see the dollar not being the reserve currency for quite some time.
we think about using digital assets as a great opportunity to solve the significant problem of trapped capital and pre-funding in the traditional correspondent banking system, which is extremely inefficient with the setup of Nostro and Vostro accounts, and we estimate that up to $10 trillion of trapped capital are being used very inefficiently as a result of this legacy system that we're currently moving money with. XRP is a decentralized open source asset that was specifically built for the payments use case. And so it has real utility and value, and that is a key differentiator of our digital asset versus other cryptocurrencies.
Dudley is openly calling for the Fed to pull the plug on the economy to defeat Trump. We're seeing in all of Europe either negative growth rates or close to negative growth rates. The US is sustaining a slightly above negative growth rate, and it's not the trade war that's doing it, it's the debt. It's the buildup of government debt, of corporate debt, of private debt, which is designed to keep the bubble in place, keep the worthless assets that are being held at face value on the books of banks, to keep them in play when they should be written off. So this is collapsing. What really has to happen is there has to be a shift in policy making, not by the central bankers, but by sovereign national governments. And I personally think that what people like Jerome Powell and the others who are the front men for the international global bankers.
The president says he never threatened to demote Powell, but he has the power to do so if he wanted, which kind of felt like a threat. Here's what he had to say.
What he's done is $50 billion a month in quantitative tightening. That's ridiculous. What he's done is he raised interest rates too fast.
Do you worry he's going to hurt your re-election?
I think the economy is so strong we're going to bowl through it, but I'm not happy with his actions. No, I don't think he's done a good job. I think this, if he didn't raise rates, Obama had very low rates, so Obama was playing with funny money. I wasn't. I'm playing with the real stuff.
What they realize is that Trump's attack on the Fed, that this is a signal that Trump is prepared to go after the Federal Reserve System, because it's this system which is the problem. Giving central bankers the control over the credit and currency of a nation is the problem, and it's been since 1913 when the Fed was created, unconstitutional. So if Trump is serious about this, and I think they look at him and see that he is, they're quite frightened. And so they're trying to rally their troops and to create a situation where they can sink Trump if they think Trump won't go along with them.
Now, as we know, the central bank, the deep state, they are pushing their agenda like never before because they understand that things are falling apart for them. And this is how you know the patriots are on the winning side, that they are on the offensive and the deep state and the central bankers, they're on the defensive.